Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Mazza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of Kosa Music, inviting you to listen in conversations with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in our music world. And remember to subscribe so you can receive notices on upcoming other interesting podcasts. Today, I have the great pleasure of being in conversation on Shaping Your Journey with one great drummer, great friend, one who's come to Kosa in the past, and he's been around. Been around. What a thing to say, been around. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate that.
I have a question before you go off into the conversation of what affects your trajectory. What made you decide to do certain things? Is that's always interesting to know what someone was actually thinking, or how did that happen? I wanted to ask you in the very beginning, what was that very first thing for you that launched you into this crazy world of our music that we love?
Well, my mother being a Baptist church organist and being a fan of the Great American Songbook from the war years. My father was in General Patton's army, and so the big bands were such an important part of the music scene then, and everybody sang those songs. So I was learning songs like Jada and Satin Doll and Take the A Train, and I didn't even know that these were supposedly this was music for older people because we were singing them in the house with my 2 older sisters, and we started singing four-part harmony because we thought that's what everybody did, and then when I saw Gene Krupa play on television, I was 5, and that captivated me, and I said, "I have to do that. I really wanna do that." So they made me play piano for 5 at 5 at 5 years old, and I didn't like it, so the teacher let me quit and I waited until I was 8 before, I could prove to them that I was serious about drumming, so they got me with a private teacher at 8, and I was the, soloist in the 5th grade band when I was 8, so they figured there was some talent there and they'd better nurture that, so I got with a very technical, hands teacher in Richmond, Indiana, where I'm from, and he guided me through what his take on drums were, which was starting with the rudimental snare drum, Haskell Hardbook 1, Benjamin Podimsky,
Oh,
Charlie
yes.
Wilcoxon,
Ah, yeah.
and I went through all those books by the time I was 12,
Wow.
and you had to win a contest before he would award you a drum set. So, and nowadays he'd be thrown in jail for child abuse, for waiting and not letting not letting a student have a drum set right out of the gate. But it was great training for me because you could just wind my hands up and that was it. Turn him loose because I had enough technique. And then when I got the drum set at 12, after I won my first contest, I was too young to enter the contest. So at 12, I could and I got a first place, and so then I got a drum set, and I wondered whose feet these feet belonged to because the hands were happening and I had no feet, so I had to play catch up with that. But the big band music, the big band scene from World War II was in our house. The Tommy Dorsey Band, Glenn Miller, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, and I was captivated by the sophistication of the drummers in those bands. So the music that came along in my sister's generation, which was Bill Haley and Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry, and it's all good drumming, but after seeing Papa Joe Jones and Gene Krupa and Louie Bellson and Buddy Rich, I mean, just that fascinated me coming from the technical snare drum side of things, so I was always drawn to that more so than the music of my generation.
Right. No, that's amazing because I mean it's interesting, like the generation thing. I would go over to friends' house when I was a teenager. When I started a little later, and I would watch. All of us would be into the Beatles, and all the people that came up in that generation. And my friend's sister was heavy into Elvis Presley, and thought that we were totally crazy listening to this other stuff.
Yeah.
And so you have these other juxtapositions of areas in your life that people listening to one thing or they listen to another, and they don't often meet. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, I think I think it's opening up a little now because everything is available to everybody. You can find it. So a lot of it is based on peer pressure too.
Right.
Do you want to be with the in crowd of your friends? And by the time the Beatles came along, I was fully entrenched in what I wanted to do. I was ready to go on a big band when I was 15.
Wow.
So the Beatles
Beautiful.
came on Ed Sullivan when I was 12. And the drumming didn't kill me after seeing all those gentlemen that I'd seen play before. And, just a couple of chords, 3 chords, and the lyrics, "I wanna hold your hey, yay, yay, and I'm listening to Cole Porter and, Rodgers and Hart and all these great songs with great lyrics. And it just I mean, I appreciated what they were doing. They were bringing this new wave of music in, but it didn't affect me like it affected most of the United States. So I went to
Sure.
school the next day, and I realized quickly in 6th grade that I was the only person who wasn't crazy about the Beatles, and my life was gonna be very different from then on.
That's amazing because I mean I had I flipped the other side because I mean of course Ringo and I have these conversations with a lot of the guys like Greg Bissonette and everybody and we were all like and I said did you have the same experience the next morning like the world changed the world was a different color everybody behaved differently we were all different but then afterwards we discovered those other people like Buddy Rich. I mean I became a fly on the wall watching him all the time and in fact, Repercussion once we opened up for Buddy Rich in Toronto one year.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
and then watching Louis Bellson with the big bands talk about subtlety and control and musicality, I was
Yeah.
just
Well,
in
he
awe.
he was he was one of a kind. Louis was one of a kind, yeah.
Yeah, but you went on to play with some of those big bands like Woody Herman and
Mhm.
um, I mean Oscar, not Count Basie. You played with Count and
I played with, Count Basie Orchestra just after, Count passed, like, a couple of months after he passed, but the band was exactly the same. I had actually gotten a call to go on the band, but I didn't wanna leave the bands I was with. But I had goals coming up to play with, Oscar Peterson, Ray Brown, the great bassist, Count Basie, and Woody Herman. And so, by the time that I was ready that I could go on the Basie band, Butch Miles was on for a long period of time, my friend Butch Miles, and, Basie wasn't going to get rid of him, and rightly so.
no,
So, we had a battle of the bands actually when I was on Woody Herman's band, and Count Basie said, "It looks like I'm gonna have to keep my eye on you, young man," you know? So,
nice.
unfortunately, he wasn't in the band when I did get to join the band. But yeah, I was on the Tommy Dorsey band, Lionel Hampton band, Woody, and Count Basie, and then later, Bill Holman big band, and I love Terry Gibbs' Dream Band I played with out here in Los Angeles and various big bands, Shorty Rogers. So I've always my 2 genres have been, big band and piano trio. Those are my 2 favorite genres. So I was fortunate enough to, get the opportunity after working hard for it and doing all the homework that you need to do, which is learn all the music of all these people that you wanna play with, that I did get the opportunity to play with all of them, and when you get that opportunity, you wanna seize that opportunity and make sure that those musicians aren't thinking of anybody else in that drum chair while you're sitting there. So, it's memorizing all the music, knowing the book. My first night on Woody's band, I didn't open the book until the last tune in a 4-hour dance,
Did they
and,
notice? Did
they
they
hadn't
notice
recorded
that?
that last tune, so that's it that I had to open the music, but I had everything else memorized. So, that I think
Nice.
that's a good tip for people that wanna play in a band, go in and own it.
Yeah. No, that's a really good way to say that too, because I was going to ask you. So you planned. I mean, most of us who end up doing things what they do actually don't think about it, but we actually do some planning. That's what I want to do, and you actually go for it without realizing it sometimes. But you consciously said, "Here are the people I want to play. Here's the music I'm going to learn, and I'm going to work for it, and I'm going to prepare for that." Right?
Right, and in preparing, you find every drummer that's played with that artist and find out about them. You start seeing common links between the drummers and the artist, and then you buy more of those LPs, in my case, discount record store for 39 cents, and you learn everything about Don Lamont on Woody Herman's band and Davy Tuff and Art Mardigan Sonny Igo, and all these are these drummers, Chuck Flores, Jake Hanna that went on Woody's band, that you wanted to
Wow.
learn which drummer did what and why the band sounded differently with each drummer. So um, it was a lot of inspiration for me just from listening to those records and then studying with John Von Ohlen, who had been on Woody Herman's band and Stan Kenton's band, and he sort of guided me in what I needed to do musically, playing wise, to get on Woody's band because he knew I really wanted to do that. So it was great information. John Von Ohlen was a huge mentor for me, and he was coming from Mel Lewis, and so we just sort of have that level handed down. And I'm very very fortunate to have both Mel and John Von Ohlen as dear friends too.
Nice. And I think, like some of us, I grew up as, a rock drummer, and then I gravitated to the other places where I wanted to learn, which was all this percussion, classical percussion and jazz and world music. So I just went crazy, and I'm still learning. But what we did is, what I'm finding is people who studied, whether it was rock drumming to begin with or jazz, you're playing with the records, you're learning the songs, the repertoire.
Right,
That's
right.
key, right? In
Yeah,
whatever.
it's true. Mel, I had to laugh because Mel always said, "Why don't you play to the radio like I did growing up?" Well, the radio was all that was going on when he was growing up, so but you look around the room and kids would start laughing like, "Play to the radio? What are you talking about?" So, yeah, but definitely just the idea of just playing to the music, yes, and getting the feel of that, that they're getting, and then go ahead and transcribe it. Make sure you're getting every little nuance in there that's happening. So, yeah, well, you've got your work cut out for you, Aldo, because being a percussionist, it's just never ending. I mean, they're all different. I mean, the world percussion and the instruments that keep coming out also, and then what you do with them. So, I had a funny story. Dr. George Gaber, who Peter Erskine and Aronoff and I
Yes.
all studied with at Indiana University, we were there at the same time. And, he said, "So Hamilton, you think you can make a career being a jazz drummer?" When I was gonna drop out after 2 years, and I said, "Yeah, I think I can." And he said, "Well, let me tell you something. You might be able to do it, but somebody's gonna come along next year and do everything you do, but they're gonna add a tambourine and shake it with their ass, and they're gonna put you out of a job." And I always kept that in mind. And the point of it is true. Everybody's coming up with something all the time, but for me, if you have your identity and your voice in what you do that no one else can do, they can put the tambourine wherever they want it because they didn't start out with the voice that you that you've acquired over the years. But I was not a big fan of percussion because I always wanted to play drum set. So for I held my nose through four mallet marimba, Phil Krause,
Right.
and I enjoyed playing timpani. I just didn't want to be a timpanist. I could tune calfskin heads with no pedals, hand screw timpani, and I
Oh,
could
yes.
ace that. He was really hard on me on that, but that's why tuning has become so important to me on a drum set. So it's
Mm.
all connected.
Yeah. No, you bring a good point. I mean, look at Kenny Aronoff, and you studied with him. I mean, he's the drummer he is, and it's really funny because, by the way, George Gaber came to Kosa as well, so I got to know him really well. So I know the character, and
Okay.
I love the man. You have to study with people like that. I had Pierre
Uh-huh.
Belus as my main teacher, but characters like Gaber and all of those great people who just did that to you and just pushed you a little bit, so that,
Right.
of course, but somebody like that saying that to you, like, the radar goes up and you're a little bit more aware, which
Yeah,
is
he
good.
he Peter always told me he knew what he was doing when he told me that. I thought, "Oh, yeah?" Shut the door of the office. I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna make you eat those words." So,
Oh,
but we stayed in touch until his death. He was very big in typing postcards and
I
sending
still
them
have
once a
some of
month,
those.
right? So, he had that going. So we ended up being okay, but he was upset with me for leaving after 2 years, and and then then we became pals after we played Indianapolis, and he would come and see me play, and so I'm grateful for what he did. Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean it's nice to study those instruments, be it timpani, mallets, because it does influence and kind of upscale your playing.
right.
I had this conversation with Harvey Mason once about his playing, and Vic Firth said, Harvey, what are you doing studying here? You're playing with Herbie Hancock. You're playing with all of these people. Why do you want to study percussion here at the conservatory? But he said, I really want to be as musical as I can. And
Yeah,
I mean, it shows. Most people know him only as a drummer. He's an incredible percussionist,
yeah.
doing all those studio
Aside
sessions.
aside from Harvey, Harvey's comments, I also think Harvey has a sound in mind when he plays, and I think when you spend any time on timpani, there there's there's no moon gel on a timpani head, there's no tape, so you get the beauty of this acoustic instrument and how you can get the sound, and that transfers over the sound you get out of a floor tom, your bass drum.
Yeah,
If you cut a hole in front of your head and put a pillow in it, that kind of negates what I'm talking about. But Harvey knows the natural sound of a drum set, and Harvey comes around and we talk, at gigs. We have a lot in common about that. But I think Harvey was really into sound at that time that he was trying to explore more, maybe,
yeah.
when he went back to study.
Yeah, and I think really enhances your drum set playing. I mean, mallets. I mean, getting back to Kenny Aronoff, being the loud and great drummer that he is, and all that he does, he's also a great jazz drummer. He was also a great mallet player and timpanist. He was.
Well, he came to Indiana, and he wasn't that strong of a drum set player. I mean, he was earmarked. Gaber earmarked him to be the timpanist to come out of there and get an orchestra.
That's right.
And you're coming from Tanglewood, and so he and I were actually trading ideas. He was helping me with marimba, and I was helping him set up big bands, like with fills and things like that. So we became instant pals, and still laugh about that. I just saw him at the West Coast Drum Shop this summer. I was on tour with Diana Krall, and our paths crossed, and I walked in on his clinic and surprised him, and we relived all those fun times of being 18, 19 years old. So, but he honored George Gaber by coming back and playing a timpani piece when George retired, and it was phenomenal. I mean, it was the rock and roll Kenny playing the timpani piece, but you could tell that he was a timpanist when he came, to IU. That's where he really was.
Yeah, and it's about being a musician. Here's
Yeah,
I just thought of a interesting story when at COSA, it was a total percussion thing, and when who was it that was in the evening we would do like 15-minute concerts. Each artist had a 15-minute set in the evening, and
right.
uh, what's his name? All of a sudden, I just got a blank. Uh, Percussionist. Ah, the I Love Lucy, Flintstones. Ah, help me on this
Uh,
one.
uh, I'm not sure I know that.
He
Was I
passed.
there? Was I there this year? This
No,
happened?
it wasn't that particular year, but he's done all of these.
Oh, Amo Richards.
Emil Richards, of course.
Okay, okay. See, I wasn't even there, and I got it. What do I win?
You get first prize again.
I get to watch all the reruns for free.
Right? Yeah, yeah. No, it was funny because Emil, he's a great guy. Every time he's Italian, and every time he would go to Italy, he would come back and bring me a thing of grappa. He says, "You'll enjoy this." I
Ah,
says, you could be my best friend." But it was
uh-huh.
funny because in his set when he was playing, he says, I think for my set I'm gonna play some of the themes like the Flintstones, and we'll do big swing. And I forget who was there, the jazz drummer that was there, and I said,
Joe
"This,
Porcaro probably playing drums. They played a lot together.
yeah, I forget that particular year, but I said, listen, because Kenny was there, and I said,
Uh-huh.
because we used to record all the concerts and we used to release CDs from the concerts, and I said, why don't you do something really different and like raise some eyebrows? Ask Kenny to play." He said, "Oh, that's a good idea." And nobody in the audience, I mean, all the participants that we had,
Yeah.
didn't see that coming. And we still have a recording of this, of Kenny just killing it, killing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great swing drummer too.
Uh-huh.
so, so, and
Yeah.
you know, my point was the idea of enlarging your horizons completely and as much as you can as a musician. I mean, of course, you can be very specific. I mean, and you're very specific on what you do, and but others want to be super large. Others are super large and keep it that way publicly. Others don't.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I'm specific, as far as the ride cymbal, and, it came from John Von Ohlen, which was drop the stick down on 2 and 4 and let it get 3 bounces, dag-a-day, 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 dag-a-day. And so I left the IU music school and got 8 months later, I was on the Tommy Dorsey band. And I had a big 24-inch K, the band called The Eliminator. And, uh, and I'm swinging on Opus 1, and I'm going, "Yeah, enough of Indiana Music School and the tambourine and the da da da, all that the." And I look down and I'm going, and this is the timpani grip that George Gaber showed me, which happened to be the same stroke that John Von Ohlen was showing me, and they were actually the same concept. And I went, "Yeah, okay, I guess IU was good for me."
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it couldn't, it
It's
can't
all
do any.
connected.
Yeah, it can't do any damage. But I mean, you went on to play. I mean, you've played with people like Ella Fitzgerald, also,
Yeah.
um, and Oscar. Were you? Because Oscar, you know, he's from Montreal originally, and I know you know that.
Mhm.
But he lived in Toronto for most of his life. Did
Right.
did you um, did you move up there to work with him, or
No. No, that is a good point though, Aldo. My suggestion to students in the past have been, uh, whoever you wanna go study with, go to them wherever they are and study with them. It's not so much a university, but this drumming thing is a craft. We have to learn. It's like a blacksmith or a cobbler. You gotta sit next to the artist and see them do it every night and be around them, and you can't do that coast to coast or different coasts or even Zoom. I don't think we can do that. You got to sit there and feel the living being doing it while you're absorbing it, and put your phone down and absorb it instead of record it and look at it later, because it's different. You're in the moment. So uh, I set out goals of who I wanted to play with. I got every Oscar Peterson trio record I could. I could sing the bass solos of Ray Brown. I transcribed what Ed Thigpen did. I played along to those records. I went beyond that and found out that Oscar Peterson's father worked on the trains. He was a porter, and he was from the islands. He wasn't from Montreal. And you learn as much as you can about these individuals. Woody Herman is of Polish descent. He lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His wife's name was Charlotte. She was a dancer. They met in vaudeville. He took over Isham Jones' band when Isham became ill, because the band appointed Woody to be the new band leader, and that became the band that plays the blues, and eventually Woody Herman and the Thundering Herd. So all of that is just by doing your homework to really find out if you want to study with these people or if you want to play with these people. So that's what I did with Oscar Peterson. And eventually your worlds are going to meet somewhere. So I play with Ray Brown. Ray Brown hears me play with Monty Alexander and John Clayton, who I met at Indiana University, my best friend from 1972.
wow?
He hears me play, and he says, "I want to keep an eye." He tells John Clayton, "I want to keep an eye on that drummer." John said, "Well, I got a drummer for you. He's the one," because John was close with Ray. And Ray called me then and said, "I've got a little something for you. Shelly Mann just left the group, the LA Four, and we need a Jewish drummer, and you're close enough." So that's another thing. A sense of humor in this music is very important. You can be serious about your music, but don't take yourself too seriously. So
Yeah.
through that, then I met Norman Granz, who used to book the jazz at the Philharmonic, but then he became Oscar Peterson's manager as well as Ella Fitzgerald's manager. So I met Norman Granz through Ray Brown, and Oscar had heard us play, and he liked the connection that Ray Brown and I had when we played time. So he started asking about me. So how my affiliation with Oscar came about, and then we became instant friends. We're both Leos. My wife and I were invited to his wedding. Uh,
Nice.
I was a pallbearer at his funeral. We didn't have one incident that all of the incidents that are on record from the '60s and beyond was that he was tough on drummers. I never had an issue with him. One night he said, "You were 6 inches too far away from the piano. Don't let that happen again." And I said, "You got it." And that was it. The rest of the time we're having dinner together and discussing wine, and I just had a ball. I loved spending time with Oscar Peterson on and off the bandstand, but he also appreciated that I knew every tune that he called.
Yeah, yeah, and being ready. And I always say this: there's no such thing as coincidence. Coincidence
Right,
don't happen. You
right.
create, and you're perfect, perfect the way you describe it, knowing everything about, and eventually your worlds come together. To me, that's mind blowing. It's really interesting, but it's like magic, but it's true. It's really true.
Yeah, and I think something that, younger people can learn is, it's not so much social media and networking, it's relationships. And playing your butt off every time you sit down for the right reasons, playing music to make everybody in the band sound better than they possibly can. What can you do to make that happen? Instead of sit down and blow the windows out and show and tell, which so many drummers do. And that's why I don't really look at myself as a drummer. I look at myself as a musician who happens to own a drum set.
Yeah,
So I think musicians are drawn to that. So, I want to play with musicians. I don't want to be a drum god. I want to be a musician that plays music with other musicians that like playing music. So I think our goals get kind of twisted sometimes as drummers, but it's easy to understand. We're throwing a slab of rubber and a pair of sticks and said, now play Mama Dada. And everybody else goes for a long tone on their instrument. They have to produce a sound.
right.
We're
Yeah,
starting out with gymnastics on a practice pad. So sometimes drummers never even think about sound. There are drummers that are 70 years old who don't think about sound. They're just executing whatever they play, and
yeah,
they're executing it very well, but they don't get off the practice pad. They don't really get beyond the practice pad, in my
yeah.
opinion.
And often, I mean, what happens, I think, I mean, I'm just thinking as you're saying this, I remember I never thought about sound. I mean, you're aware of a certain level of it, but not until I studied with Pierre Beluse, who was the percussion teacher at McGill. But he was a great jazz drummer himself. I also played
Mhm.
in the symphony, so he was one of those guys. The sound really mattered. And I remember he made me play etudes on the snare drum, the same etude for months, and it like really tortured me. And it was always about sound.
Mhm.
Sound. What does that sound like? Does it sound like velvet? Does it sound like a rough uh, sandpaper? This
Yeah.
uneven on one side.
Yeah,
So
did
it
you
would.
see Christopher Lamb's clinic at the recent, PASIC? Wasn't
And
that beautiful?
yes, so I didn't see him at PASIC because I was performing, but I saw that same clinic at the Midwest in Chicago.
Okay. What a
Ab-
touch. I mean, just
Absolutely.
beautiful. And the thing that knocked me out was that he's talking about rebound and the stick, and he said, "And if you're having trouble getting that rebound with flipping the fingers up on the stick, put the stick down and pick up a brush." And I could have kissed him. It's like, yes. Uh, for the principal of the New York Phil to say, "Pick up a brush," it's like, wow, okay, and we had dinner that night, actually. It became, sort of the topic with Shi Wu. We were all talking about we're all kinda coming from the same place.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
And
But boy,
his
what a
whole.
beautiful sound. So I think if you start with touch and finesse and sound, everybody can hit a backbeat. Everybody raise an arm over their head and hit the hell out of the drum, but it's harder to play soft and get a beautiful sound.
Yeah.
So
And to
anyway,
get a
enough
good a
preaching.
good sound, a good sound. And one thing that I really enjoyed, it was funny because I was sitting watching him in that clinic because he did exactly the same clinic. His whole reference to basketball.
Yeah.
you know? And it was funny because and I told him afterwards, I said, I can't believe you did that because I didn't really learn this from anybody. I just kind of realized that this whole pretend you're playing a basketball
Right,
and you're using the same analogy. So
right.
he says, yes, I stole it from you. I said,
Well, for me, when I would teach that I'm sorry, when I would teach the stroke that Von Olin showed me, I said, "Raise the ball up to your head. Now release the ball. How high does it bounce? It comes up to your chest next. You let it keep bouncing. The next level is your waist, next to your knees. Next, dot, 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 it gets slow. It gets lower. So it's the same thing. If you let the ball bounce instead of stopping it in midair, then you'll get 3 bounces or 4 bounces out of it.
yeah.
So yeah, that's a lot in common with Chris.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, no. I said I was floored when you started talking about the basketball, and it's funny because I saw the basketball on the stage, and I asked, I think he was doing his clinic for Majestic, and I asked him. I said, "What's he doing with that basketball up there?" He says, "Oh, you'll see." And then he did that, and I said, "Oh man, thank you for doing that because that's exactly what people need to hear." Apart from what you just said is doing the same thing with the brush because and you're a master of playing brushes. I love the way you play brushes. But
Thank you.
when I teach my students and they're on the brushes and they're the rough thing, and I said, every single move, every single muscle is being reflected in your sound on the snare drum. It's very
Right,
sensitive. And they freak out once they start paying attention to that, how
right.
sensitive it is. And you speak, it's like I said, it's in your mind. And it's right from your mind to the
Yeah,
drum, and it's not lying. It's not.
yeah.
It's amazing, amazing.
No, I think brushes are really, they show your personality that, and they expose it too. If you don't have a lot together of who you are or what you can do with them, I think a lot of drummers are afraid to learn more about them, until they can get something more together. But a lot of times it's just play 3 beats by just sweeping the brush across the head. Sometimes that's all you need, the hi-hats on 2 and 4. You don't have to keep chugga, 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 chugga the whole time. Just let it breathe sometimes, I always think of conductors when they do this, with the arms, they're from inside to out, but then it was something broader, the same kind of motion with the brushes where you're going from the middle of the head and expanding to the rim and just make it a broader sound. So,
Yeah,
yeah, all of it is connected, like we're saying.
yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I see people playing brushes with ideas like yourself or Clayton Cameron or a few people who really have spent a lot of time on brushes and have expanded the not the repertoire of brushes playing, but explored what the possibilities, some of those possibilities, and it's a forever thing. It never ends.
Yeah, that's true.
Amazing. Yeah. Who else was a great brush player away from the way back? One of the first ones that you would suggest people listen to.
Well, one of the first was Papa Joe that I saw really play brushes, beautifully and go for different sounds, and he was pretty when he played brushes. Buddy Rich, oddly enough,
Ah, yes,
he
yes,
played with
yes.
Oscar Peterson, Ray Brown, and, I believe it's Herb Ellis, and it's a record called, for Count Basie, and I think he picks up his sticks on one track, and the rest of it's brushes, and he was a beautiful brush player. People sleep on Buddy Rich's brush playing. It's fantastic. Um, Louis Bellson was a great brush player. Shelly
Yes.
Manne, I learned a lot from. Jake Hanna, up tempos, uses the same up-tempo technique that Papa Joe Jones did, and I don't see very many people using that, but it's crossed on 1, 2, a 3, so you're open on on the backbeats. Your hands are crossed on 1, and then you open on 2, and then skip over a 3, cross again, open on 4, and other people most people go the other way.
Uh-huh. So
So,
so just
but
to,
it's
just to
less it's
back
less
up.
arm motion if you do it this way. It's all wrists and fingers when you do it this way.
So
So those
back
were
up
huge influences on me.
Back up a little bit because I play. Is your starting position crossed?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I do. But I've seen people do it the other way, which I'm really uncomfortable with. So I say this is the way I play. Uh,
Uh-huh.
my approach is 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right. Right.
That's what.
Cross open. Yeah.
Right, right.
And I think it allows you to not use your arms and just use your wrist and flick your wrist back and forth with some finger control. And the other way, you have to use your arm to cross over on beat two. So up tempos, you're going to have trouble at up tempos. But Ed Thigpen, of course, was a master, and I seeked him out to talk with him about what it was like playing with Oscar Peterson. And I talked to Shelly Mann, and a lot of them didn't want to really give a lesson. They just wanted to discuss it a little bit. And Mel Lewis, who hardly had any motion at all when he played, he didn't even cover the entire surface of the head. That's how little motion he
Really?
played. It was like in
Okay.
the middle with the left hand and about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock with the right hand, and that's where he stayed. But he got some beautiful brush ideas out with that. Um, yeah, they're just so many. Philly Joe Jones, I had a full day lesson with Philly Joe Jones in 76, I want to say 75 or 76, 11 o'clock in the morning until 7 at night, and he drove me back to my gig, a sweetheart, and just showed me everything from that brush book of his, the brush artistry, and went through the Wilcoxon book with me and showed me how to interpret that from his way of thinking. And so, a lot of light bulbs went off that day. But just Kenny Clark was a great brush player. I got to meet him and speak with him about it. Um, so there just I think there are way too many to mention, and I'm not just stopping here and not mentioning others, but I think we could do the whole podcast with great brush players that
Well,
influence you. Anybody you see who can do it, you can learn something from it,
yeah.
Ed Thigpen and I would always laugh because we would do things opposite of each other. And so we would try what the other one did, and it didn't feel good. So we just ended up laughing and saying, "All right, you keep your thing, I'll keep my thing." And I love what you do, and I love what you do. Let's move on. Let's go get something to eat.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, and Ed was such a gentleman. He was and a
Oh,
great player, of course. Yeah. No, no, he
beautiful.
was
Yeah,
he was amazing.
he was
I
beautiful.
remember I remember he and Michelle Donato played with Oscar Peterson for a while. Do you remember the bass player, Michelle Donato? Did you ever come
Yes,
across him?
yes.
Yeah, because he still lives here in Montreal, and he had
Okay.
been in Toronto working with Oscar. I think with Ed, while Ed was in the band, right? I'm not
I don't
sure.
know if I don't have that recording if they did it. Um, he was well, it wasn't Jerry Fuller or someone at that time that Oscar was using, or even Ray Price, those drummers. It might have been after Ed that Michelle, but
Okay.
I don't have that recording, so I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just curious.
I have more homework to do, see?
Sorry. Come back when you're ready, Jeff. No, it's amazing. I mean, somebody like Oscar Peterson, I only met him once because I worked with Oliver Jones, who was, I think Oliver Jones was another great jazz pianist from
Yes, he
Montreal,
is. Yeah.
who studied with Oscar's sister, I think, when they lived in Montreal.
Right,
And
Daisy, yeah.
And so I only met Oscar once, and I didn't realize what a physically huge person he was. His
Right,
hands were like twice mine,
right.
and he must have had a reach of maybe a tenth
I think
I,
more.
or more.
Yeah, one of the longest reaches, yeah, more than a 10th, yeah.
Yeah, I saw him in Toronto. He was doing a book signing at one of those jazz conferences or something, and yeah, I mean, I'd never realized because he always looked big, but you don't until you see somebody in person. Um,
Yeah,
but he was an amazing player and such a nice personality, like a beaming personality, right?
great. No, he was bigger than life, you know?
Right. What I'm wondering, when did you move out to LA?
I moved out in January of '78. I was on Woody Herman's band, and I told Woody that I wanted to stay on for a year. He said, "I want a drummer that will stay on for a year," because we had a good band. It was Joe Lovano and Mark Johnson, the bassist, and Pat Coyle on piano, Birch
Wow.
Johnson on trombone, Alan Vizzuti played lead. We had a hell of a band, and uh, I I did want to stay on for a year, but after 6 months, we had done the European tour, and we did 3 records in 1 month. In January of
Wow.
'78, we did 3 recordings, and one was nominated for a Grammy. Chick Corea wrote a suite for the band. It's called Chick Donald Walter Woodrow, and it was nominated that year. And then we did Roadfather, the direct-to-disc classic Roadfather album that, was Woody's, of Woody's band. And on the very last record date, Ray Brown's office was right across the street, on Vine Street in Hollywood, and I was going over meeting Ray, uh, talking about joining the LA4 because they needed somebody to fill the drum chair after Shelley left. So I met with him and signed the contract, went back for the last session with Woody, and I said, I've gotta give my notice. In 2 weeks, I'll give you 2 weeks notice, and then I'm gonna stay in LA and, play with Ray Brown." And Woody said, "But you're gonna stay on for a year." I said, "I know, but I've always wanted to play with Ray Brown and move to LA, and this is my opportunity." And he said, "Well, you won't like that band, pal," you know? So the bus took off and I stayed in LA, and, John Riley, replaced me on, Woody Herman's band, and
Right.
that was my move to LA, to join the LA4.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, I mean, it's an anchor because then, I mean, from there you developed a bunch of things. And I remember I had a conversation once with because I was doing something in Australia, and Diana Krall was there. I'm
Mhm.
not sure if you were on that. I don't think you were on that tour, and we were hosted by the Canadian commissioner or the head of the state. I mean, the ambassador, basically, Canadian ambassador was there. So he had a big reception for myself, for Diana, because she's being Canadian, and she mentioned an experience she had with you that you really helped her out in LA doing demos or something like that. I don't remember exactly the details.
Yeah, I first met her. She came to a jazz camp in Port Townsend, Washington. She lived in Nanaimo, BC. So she
Right.
came down to that jazz camp because her favorite record at that time was Monty Alexander, John Clayton, and me. And she wanted to know the inner workings of that trio. So I was the only member of that trio at that camp, and she found out. So she came down to ask questions about that recording in that band. How does that trio play like that? And I thought she was kidding me, that she came down to study with me because George Cables was the piano teacher there. And it's like, "Well, why don't you study with She said, "Oh, I will, but I wanna talk about that trio." So I heard her play at the camp, and she was phenomenal. She didn't sing, she was a piano player.
Right.
So I said, "You have enough talent, you can do whatever you wanna do." And she said, "I wanna study with Jimmy Rolls in Los Angeles." And I said, "Well, you'll have to come down to LA to do that." And I told John Clayton about her, and I told Ray Brown about her, and I said, "I found a piano player that's unbelievable, and she wants to study with Rolls. We have to get in touch with him." So John called Jimmy Rolls and he said, "Would you take this student on?" And he said, "Yeah, why not?" So she came down. Now Jimmy had been, Billie Holiday's accompanist and Marilyn Monroe in the movies, and I mean, he was one of the great jazz piano players of all time. So he took her under his wing, and he's the one that started her singing, unbeknownst to us, and she stayed in LA. John and I worked with her being a trio piano player. Ray loved the way she played and said, "You you put her together, you put an album together with her where she's the leader. You gotta make her a piano leader, a trio leader." And she joined the Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra. We gave her a lot of opportunities to try to grow, which she did, of course, and she was grateful. She used to babysit for John Clayton's kids and would house sit for my wife and I when we'd go on vacation. So it was like
Nice.
family. It's like your little sister. So then she was tired of LA after a while. We did a demo and it came out, on a label from Montreal, Just in Time
Just in
Records,
time. Yes,
and it
yes.
was called Stepping Out, and that was her first CD. And then a talent agent in New York, Marion Topper, who was friends with Ray Brown and me, we played New York, and she said, "I need a female artist for my roster." And I said, "Well, I just did a demo with one earlier this year." She said, "Have her send me a CD and an 8 by 10," and I did, and the companies started, bidding on who was gonna get her, and GRP won, and Tommy LaPuma, and so, that was the beginning of her really escalating into the Diana Krall that she has become now, so, yeah, but we were there at the beginning, and I don't work with her often, but John Clayton and I did 3 weeks in July this year, and it was great fun being out there and just, having a ball, and we played that same camp, Port Townsend, so it was like the full
No,
circle of
really
where we had met, so it was
nice,
really a great, great evening to do that, and they had a fundraiser that night and raised a ton of money for the camp, and so,
beautiful.
yeah, it's like, I'm very proud of her, it's like, watching my little sister do well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's nice to hear, stories like this. Like, it's so important for all of us to help somebody when you see an opportunity to be helpful. I mean,
Mhm.
that should be part of our purpose in general, right?
Well, it's happened to us, Ray Brown
Yeah.
and Oscar Roy. John Clayton likes to say he says to Ray, "How can I thank you, or how can I repay you for everything you've done for me?" And Ray said, "You can pass along this information to people who deserve it, just like I did with you. That's how you can thank me." And Oscar said the same thing. So, you see somebody that you can help along and they're deserving of all the time and the effort that you give them, then, it's like one of your children, you are
Yeah.
gonna help them, right?
Yeah. I mean, we never do things alone. It's always a team and a team of people who throw the ball at each other or
Right.
say, "Hey, look over there," or we've all done that, and I'm
Yeah.
always personally grateful to some of the people like Pierre Belluse, and actually that's how I ended up in Montreal. My timpani teacher, I was a rock drummer, and I started opening up to all this other music, like classical and jazz and everything, and I didn't know anything. But in my first year at Ottawa U, my teacher at the National Arts Center Orchestra said, "You can't stay here. You have to go to Montreal and study with Pierre Belluse." And
Uh-huh.
he just, I mean, I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that. I'll get ready." I was working hard, but then I got an acceptance letter from McGill, and I said, "Ian, I don't remember doing an audition, but I got accepted." And he says, "Well, you remember one day in your there was a one of your lessons. There was a gentleman in the corner with sunglasses that looked a little bit like yours, Jeff, sitting in the corner, and that was Pierre Belluse. So that was your audition."
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it takes people to go out of their way to set something up, to do something that they know is important
Right.
to them. Like you've done, like all those great people do all the time. It's important.
Yeah, it's true. John Clayton likes to say it's based on relationships, not the networking or the whatever, or here's my business card,
But
It's really relationships, and
yeah,
people, and I wanna be around people who care about the same things that I care about and as deeply as I care about them. That's who I wanna hang out with,
very
and
well
that
said.
eventually
Yeah.
comes to, I'm getting on a plane. The reason today is crazy is I'm getting on a plane at 7 o'clock tonight to fly to Phoenix. Something came up for Lewis Nash, and he asked me to come over to Phoenix and sub for him tonight with Russell
Wow.
Malone and Bobby Floyd on Hammond B3 and Ricky Woodard, and can I
Beautiful.
do the night for him? So that's, I didn't give Lewis my business card 40 years ago. We just started hanging out and becoming friends and admiring each other's playing and become friends. And so it's like, okay. And he helped me out. I got COVID earlier in the year, and he helped me out on a gig. He did a whole weekend for me and couldn't do the rest of it. So Peter Erskine filled in for the rest of it. So, it's these are friendships that you get early on, and that's the relationships that keep this music going and helping each other out and suggesting or recommending, and it's not a whole lot of competition of trying to cut somebody because we're all good at what we do, and I can't do what Joe LaBarbera does, and I can't do what Peter Erskine does, and Lewis, and I mean, we all realize that about each other. So, but if you want a quality sub, you know who you can give a call, you'll get somebody in there that can do the job. But you don't want them to take the gig for you, you understand? You don't want them to play too good, but
But I mean, there's also the respect of the situation, and I mean, it's about human relations. But you said that really well, Jeff, and I'm glad it's about building relationships because relationships with the music, with yourself, with what you do, how you treat the world around you, and if you do it well, things always it's like a boomerang. You know,
yeah.
it comes around, and you might as well be in a good place all the time because your life is so short, right?
Yeah, one of the greatest relationship builders was Familero. He was that I met at your Cosa, and I didn't know him, and we connected there, and he was one of the funniest people. I mean, he had me in tears the
Oh,
entire
yes.
time I was there. He was one of the funniest people I've ever met. But oh, there's Arnie Lang. Arnie, come on over and sit down. And Arnie came through Indiana University when I was a freshman with the rest of
Wow.
the New York Phil section that Gaber had set up. Buster and Saul. I mean, they're all there.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
hadn't seen him since I was a freshman, and here I am at the COSA camp, and it's like, man, this is how these things work. Arnie's asking me about my brush playing, and I'm like, but you're Arnie Lang, man. So it's wild how it
Yes.
all comes to fruition. If you're in the right space, headspace, and so yeah, Don was maybe the greatest relationship mentor,
Oh,
and
yeah.
motivator to bring all that together.
He came to Kosa, well, from the beginning. I mean, I had him he was like one of the, key stable persons for the whole time. And
Yeah.
it's funny because he's the only guy I know can walk into a crowded elevator that's quiet when you get in. By the time they leave, everybody's exchanging phone numbers.
Right. Right. That's right.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
staying
What a
positive. I
guy.
think, making everybody else's day. Just what does a smile cost? I just
Yeah.
being easy, making things easy for people, and
Yeah.
and bringing something to the table. I mean, that's
Right.
important. And what you experienced at Costa was the whole family thing that we're all there. How often do we get a chance to sit with each other in that context, right?
Yeah. There's one drummer
Um,
in every band.
yeah,
That's
that's right.
it.
That's it.
So
So
when you
we used
get
to.
when you get, more than one, it's like, "Wow, this is kinda weird. We get to talk about different stuff now?"
Yeah. Yeah. So that's always a lot of fun in what we do because you have all of these drummers and percussionists who finally can hang and not just say hello, how you doing? Let's catch up 2 minutes. It's really conversations and
Yeah.
and going beyond. I mean, we would have you remember Jim Chapin,
Yeah.
we would have
Of
to
course.
pull him out because he came for many, many years at the COSA camps. And
Yeah.
I'd have to get one of the tech guys to follow him to make sure he went to lunch and make sure he
Yeah.
came because he would never make it because he'd be stopped everywhere. But then you're sitting at the table after classes with all of these people, you
Yeah.
know, and that's
No, he
that's
would
the
eat, breathe, and sleep it. It was, pretty unbelievable to be around him. Yeah. Another great experience from that COSA, that was, um, we had nice facilities to stay in. I think there were dorms, in
yes,
Vermont, and
yes,
you used a common bathroom with a dorm mate. If it was, I hate to say dorm because it was like a great apartment. And
yes,
and my apartment mate was Liberty DeVito, and I thought, "Well, how's this gonna go?" And we had a ball together. It's just the coming together of people just getting to know each other. And yeah, we kinda do the same thing. We play the same instrument, but we bring something different to it, and you're asking each other what's going on. And he was so funny, and his clinic
yes,
was funny. And now there's somebody that is serious about what he does, but he doesn't take himself too seriously.
yeah, yeah.
He has fun. He has fun when he plays.
Yeah, no, he's great, and I mean, bringing people together from different worlds, or
Mhm.
coming together and having these conversations when you're at some point you realize we're all talking the same thing, really, you know. And
Yeah,
especially when you're serious about what you do, not and you said nicely, I mean, you can't take yourself seriously because we're just fortunate to be able to do this and crazy enough to do it. But it's
right.
beautiful. But it's what we do that is serious. Not. I mean, we're on the receiving end. Of course, we do all the work, but we have all the fun and all the joy, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Anyway, I want to thank you for taking the time. We could go on forever on this, and I'm tempted to, but I'm gonna leave it maybe for another podcast. But
All
I
right.
really want to thank you for taking the time to join me on this and sharing your thoughts and your journey.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. We've known each other a number of years, and it's nice to sit down and just have a conversation about things and talk about some good memories too of
Yes.
people we've come across. So thanks for the opportunity.
Now, and thank you. And as I always say, Jeff, to be continued.